Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's monthly, or August's monthly Western Continuum Coordinated Entry Training. This is Brian Miller with DCED. I'm also joined by Javon Clark of Lawrence County Community Action Partnership. We are going to cover a back to basic training today, which is going to be both HMIS and CES policy training. We've got a PowerPoint put together, and we're going to be covering the intake assessment part of the process, which is basically the entry into the system, the coordinated entry tool, as well as the placement onto the prioritization list. Let's go ahead and get started. Do you want to take this part, or do you want me to go ahead and keep going?
Sure. So this class is being offered today to support the users through, we're still in that implementation phase, trying to get everyone on one accord with completing the standardized assessments and becoming knowledgeable of the coordinated entry systems, policies, and procedures. We're also going to provide a live demonstration on how to administer the coordinated assessment tool. Next month, we will review how to conduct and how to manage the prioritization list. So today's training will simply be covering the intake and the coordinated assessment tool, and Brian will walk us through that portion, and then we will review the coordinated entries, policies, and procedures for assessments.
Great, thank you. As Javon said, most of this training will be within the HMIS system, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and pretty much do a demo training of the entire process. We do, just to note that once we finish the demonstration, then we'll jump back to the policy points and tips, if you will, for the data entry that you've seen. At any time during the training, if you guys have any questions, there is a chat box available. It should be up either on the top or the side of your screen, a little chat box symbol that you can go ahead and type your question into, and we can get to that after the demonstration and during the policy parts of the training, so we can get those answered. So let's go ahead and jump into HMIS. This is going to be a complete back to basics. HMIS is a web-based software. Basically means you can get to it anywhere you have internet. Everybody's got a unique username and password that you sign in with. Couple settings, and I'm also going to cover these a little bit in kind of a basic intro to the system for any new people. One of the couple main selections that you may get when you first log into the system is work group. Now, your work group is kind of like your role in the system, what you plan to work on. So when you are planning to work with the coordinated entry system within HMIS, particularly for assessment centers, when you're going to do an intake, you want to make sure that you're on the Western Continuum Coordinated Entry work group. We also have a DV version of it for our DV assessment centers, DVACs. So you want to make sure that they select that as well. As for organization, most people are in a single organization, but if you are in multiple ones, you do want to make sure that you select the one that you are going to be working on or entering data for now. Once you've got those set, you can go ahead and use these settings, and you'll pop right into the system. As a note, the location is something that we do not use, so you do not have to worry about what that is set at. Once you hit that, it'll go ahead and pop you into the system, and it basically will always put you on what we call the client tab, and that is where the main part of the data collection for clients is. And what it will do is, this is where most of the training is going to take place, and this is where the intake and assessment part is with is within the system. Just one main point to bring out when we're talking about logging in, if anybody needs access to the system, you can contact either Javon Clark at LCAP, or you can contact the HMIS help desk to send an email request to saying, hey, I would like access to the HMIS, or I'm having login trouble. And the email to the main help desk is ra-pahmis@pa.gov. So those are kind of the main resources if you're having trouble logging into the system or you're looking to get an account. Now, within the system, I just want to show you some quick navigation before we get into it. You're going to have a menu on the side, and the system kind of works with different tabs, or what we call workspaces. So if you click on this option right here, and it's right here next to the client tab, it kind of brings up a carousel. And this kind of shows you the different, what we kind of call tabs within the system itself, and allows you to switch between the areas. Now, as we said, you basically put on the client tab, which we're going to spend a lot of our time on. And to go to that tab, all you have to do is basically select the X or the square, and it will take you right into that tab, and you'll know what tab you're on by the language right here on the top of the screen. The other tab that we also have is a home tab. Now, that home tab is a lot like a user tab. A lot of times what you're going to have on this tab is reports itself. The other tab is the provider tab, and that's the one where the actual prioritization list is, and that's the one that we will cover next month's training, and is also included in previous trainings and documentation. So that's kind of how you travel around the system to get from area to area. So like I said, we're going to settle on the client tab, and that's the first one that you go into when you're logged in. And I am in just a regular GAC, a General Assessment Center, and we're going to start with the main intake. So a new client comes in, either calls or comes in to your assessment center. The first option that you want to select is we have a coordinated entry intake option up here, right here on the menu. This is kind of the button that starts the entire process and walks you through all the different steps of the process. So we go ahead and click that option, and the first option that we have, and I'm actually going to hide the menu. We've got a little punch tab here, like a little push pin, where you can actually hide the menu to open it up so that the screen can be a little bit bigger, and whenever you need to reopen it again, you can click that option, or you can pin it open, if you will, and leave it there if you prefer the menu. So I just wanted to show out that option as well. So I'm going to open it up to make the screen a little bigger. Now, we are on the Klein Intake, which is the first step, and this is a way to either create a new client or find an existing client if they happen to be already in the system when they come into the intake. So the first thing that you want to do is down here is our search screen. This basically allows you to enter in information for the client. And you enter in first name and last name, and this is usually how I do it. And as soon as you enter in the last name and you tab off, the system is actually going to perform a search for it. And it's actually going to go ahead and it's going to look through the system and to see if any existing clients are already in the system for this person. Now, if no one shows up under the search, that means that there's nobody that matches that description yet. Now, what we always recommend is you want to, if you can collect, Social Security number, date of birth, as much information as you possibly can to try to see if there is a match in the system. And once you fill in that information, you can hit search again, and it will actually, again, search through the system to find if there is any matches within the system. As we see here, no records are found. There's no matches. That basically means the client isn't in the system, and we are going to create a new one. There's no one to select. So you can go ahead and cancel out of the screen, and what that basically means is going forward, this client, Bill Watson, is going to be a brand new client. We actually show you here with this owned by organization. It kind of gives you a little identifier of whether it's a new client, you know, if you select an existing client, to kind of let you know before you continue on what's going to happen. Now the last step before moving forward is we do have a client sharing option here that you want to set before moving forward. And this is based on verbal permission from the client that you're intaking with of whether to share or send a referral record to all the Western Coordinated Continuum Entry Assessment Centers. If they choose to share and say yes, you can select that. Anything but an affirmative, you do have to answer as no. Now, with this sharing, all this does is basically allows, if they do share, it allows other assessment centers to have access and find their client record within regular searches. Even if they do not share, they still are allowed to be put on the prioritization list and can be found on the prioritization list. So not sharing here doesn't end the process. But once you select the sharing from what the client answers, you can go ahead and hit Save and Next or Save and Continue, and that will move you on to the next step in the process, which is basically a small pre-screening. And this asks three main questions. It basically asks whether they're literally homeless, whether they're at risk for homeless, as well as if anyone in your home is making you feel unsafe or afraid. And that is akin to, you know, whether they're currently fleeing or attempting to flee from a domestic violence situation. Depending on answering these questions, the system will, you know, allow you to continue or not from an assessment standpoint. It's kind of a way to have the system, you know, tell you whether they're eligible to go forward or not. Now, to be able to move forward, they must be either literally homeless or at risk of homeless, or the system will not let them continue continue the process onto the coordinated screening, as the client must be either literally homeless or at risk of homelessness to be eligible to enter into the the coordinated entry system. So what we're going to go ahead and do is, if you happen to answer all no's, when you hit Save and Continue, I'm going to kind of show you all the options that play out with what you might see depending on some of the different answers that you can put in. So if you hit Save and Continue here, since the client wasn't literally homeless or wasn't at risk, the process stops, and it asks you to manually refer them to other parts of, other services that may be able to help them. As they're not going to continue on, there's no need to do a coordinated screening or the screening tool or placement on the prioritization list. Now, once you click that button, it'll automatically end the process, and you can move on to the next intake. Now, if you did answer yes, then we're going to go ahead and say that this client is literally homeless, so it will allow you to move on. There is one other option here that shows that has an effect on the next steps, and that is anyone in your home making you feel unsafe or afraid? Since the system is kind of broken out into general assessment centers and domestic violence assessment centers, if anybody answers a yes to this question, they also will not be allowed to continue from a general assessment standpoint. At that point, the system will actually tell you to, okay, we know that they are possibly fleeing from a domestic violence situation. So at that point, the system will ask you to manually refer them to a DVAC so that they can be, so the intake can be done from that perspective. So I wanted to kind of show you the different responses and different steps that can happen depending on how you answer these questions. So basically for a general assessment center, they need to answer yes to one of these and no to the unsafe for it to continue and allow the regular process. Now, to continue down on, we also have a couple fair housing questions that are available that ask whether they are discriminated against during an eviction or whether they are discriminated against during a search for housing. If you can answer yes, no, or unknown to either of these. If you do answer yes to either of them, it'll actually give you an option. Should give you an option, probably because I went through the system. It should give you an option to check a box here if you would like to request legal advice from the Fair Housing Law Center. So if they do select yes to being discriminated against and do check a box to wanting to receive advice, the system will automatically send an email off to the appropriate resource. I believe it's the Pennsylvania Legal SPLAS, and they will get an email with the client's basic information so that they can contact them about their discrimination. Once this information is collected, and you can go ahead and hit Save and Next, Save and Continue. Once you pass the basic parameters, the system will then take you to the coordinated screening tool, which we'll probably spend most of the time on within the training itself. So the coordinated assessment screening is a pretty large assessment tool, which is broken up into eight different sections, and each section has a group of questions that are designed to collect a client's overall prioritization, vulnerability for their placement onto the prioritization list. The first set of questions is demographics, and this collects basic information on the client themselves, name, date of birth, social security number. It also collects things like race, ethnicity, gender, as well as last grade completed and school status. Once you have finished entering all the information for the specific tab, you can go ahead and hit Next, and it will take you to the next tab within the screen. So it's kind of, you finish a page, once you're done, you hit Next, and it will move you to the next page. Now, once you hit the homeless assessment tab, all the other remaining tabs, the questions are specifically calculated to have specific point values associated to them. So as you answer each individual question, the system will, on the fly, calculate a score for not only each section, but the entire screening as a whole. And that will provide you with an overall assessment screening score, which is used for their prioritization and placement onto the prioritization list. So we're going to go ahead and go through the questions for each of these sections. The homeless assessment is based on their homeless history as well as their current homeless situation. And it asks if they've been first time, they've been literally homeless. We answer with a yes or no. Where did they sleep last night? From the drop-down list. And most of these questions are drop-down lists. A lot of them are yes and no answers. Some of them have a little bit more selections within the list to be answered. All of the questions are optional. but of course it's highly recommended to answer as many questions and collect as much information as possible so that they can have the best, collect the most information and all, as well as being able to best prioritize them for the scoring. The next section is the homeless episode history grid, and this is actually pretty important, is it actually collects their homeless history within the last 3 years, and it is a built-in grid that allows you to collect chronologically, starting from the most recent, their latest homeless episode. So you start from the nearest, where they were the previous night, and it has 5 or 6 basic locations that you can choose from. Place not meant for human habitation, emergency shelter, safe haven, interim housing, transitional housing, and hotel, motel paid for by government or charitable organization. So we're only looking for actual homeless episodes, so any kind of permanent housing is not included within you don't want to put those sections, those episodes within this grid. So we're going to start there. And a lot of them, when you answer them, if they have a definition to them, what you'll see is they'll actually have a little help ball, little help tip box, and these are actually all throughout the system, as you can kind of see. And if you hover over them, it kind of gives a little tip on either what that question is about or what that specific setting is about. So those are, we try to place them in as many places in the system as possible to give little tips on the different questions and spots within the system. For those, we have one for hotel, motel paid for by government and charitable organization, as well as interim housing. Because I know interim housing has a very specific definition, so I want to make sure everybody's aware of what that means when they use that in the grid. So let's go ahead and fill out the grid. It asks for a location, and then as well as the location name or description. So you can be as descriptive as you want, like the name of the shelter or any kind of description based on where they stayed, as well as the start and the end date. Now, at this point, all of the episodes do need to have a full end date. So if it is the latest episode and it is still ongoing, say if they're still in a shelter or still in a place not meant for human habitation, at this point in time, we recommend that you put in the current date. So that way it captures their range all the way up to the current point. And the dates do not need to be concurrent because there could be gaps in between where they, maybe they were in a non-homeless episode. But you do want to be as complete as possible when filling out this information. And then there's also a reason that left. That's it's not the latest one. You can add a reason for why they left that episode. I'm just going to go ahead and fill in 3. It does allow you to fill in as many as the client does have, and all you have to do is hit this Add to Record button here, and it will actually add rows down at the bottom so that you can, keep adding the information into the grid itself. And this also, while you're collecting it for the first time, this is also something that you can upkeep. As you review clients and review assessments while they're on the list, this is something that you will always come back to and can update when necessary. Now, one thing to note when you are doing the grid is be careful of accidentally highlighting a row and not having any information on it before you leave. you want to make sure that only the rows that are highlighted, hopefully you can see that through the webinar, are the ones that have full data in it, or you will get a kind of a validation error, because when a row is highlighted, it's actually expecting information in there. So that's one of the gotchas just to remember when moving forward from the grid. Now, at this point in time, once you filled out the grid, the system will, as of right now, provide just an overall number of stays. So it basically adds up all the stays between the start and end dates here as kind of a reference point. But the system does ask you to enter in the total number of current continuous days homeless. So you'll need to take this information that you put into the grid and apply some of the rules to it so that you can shave it down to give it the actual number of continuous days homeless. So we're going to actually go through here, actually change that to a 25. So from 5/1 all the way up to today, since there are no breaks within the homeless or long enough breaks to stop continuous, the actual continuous matches there. But just want to note that in times where there are gaps or there may be times where they're couch surfing or they were in permanent housing, these numbers will not always match up. Once you've entered in that, we have disabling conditions, and the rest of these questions are basically an assessment to collect information to try to determine whether the client is chronically homeless or not. So you can go through and answer the questions: a disabling condition, whether they've been literally homeless for the last 12 months, and whether they've had 4 or more episodes within the last 12 months. It also asks for their current housing status, which is a 1, the main HUD-based ones that hopefully everyone is fairly familiar with. Now, from that information, the system will automatically calculate whether they're chronically homeless for use on the scoring. And as we can see here, from all the scoring and the questions we've put in, the client has already accumulated 25 points for this homeless section. Now, once you're done with the section, you can go ahead and continue on by hitting the next button. Now, the system, once you've gone past the tab, you can also go back previously. It kind of like once you've completed a tab, it unlocks it, so it allows you to always go back. One note I do want to make that the next and the previous buttons are not at this point saving this information permanently. That's why we actually have this save button down here, and we actually highly recommend that after you finish each tab, before you hit next, that you go ahead and you hit that save button, and what it'll do, it'll actually save your progress wherever you are in case anything happens, you get interrupted and you have to come back to it, the internet cuts out, that sort of thing. So that's a good recommendation we have when you're filling out the assessment, especially on a new one. The next section is health and safety, and this is broken up into 3 specific sections: physical, mental health, as well as substance abuse. I'm not going to cover it as much as I did with the last homeless assessment, but it asks basic questions about the client's overall physical, mental, and substance abuse history. Most of them are yes and no, as well as what is their overall, physical, mental, and substance abuse history. And it also has a section where it has a number of diagnoses for the 3 different sections, where you can actually check 1 or more if the client has had a history or currently has that specific condition. And each subsection will be totaled based on the total points, and will provide an overall score down at the bottom. So basically it collects a whole bunch of history about the health. Now, once you are finished with that, we're going to go ahead and hit next. And the next one is domestic violence. This actually asks whether they are a domestic violence survivor, yes or no. Now, since this is a general assessment center, they shouldn't be fleeing, so that option isn't available. That is available on the domestic violence assessment version, which hopefully we'll be able to cover to show the differences later in the training. But this just basically shows whether they're a survivor or not. And it actually doesn't give any points because only those fleeing actually get points within the assessment itself. The fifth one is veteran status. Basically asks questions about whether they are a veteran or whether they were ever in active duty within the U.S. You can answer no. If you do answer yes, it actually does provide them points, I believe 75, and it also asks a number of history information about their service stay. When they started, when they separated, combat zone information, military branch, discharge status based on their veteran status. There's also questions about VA compensation, whether they have application or not, and all of these have scoring basically attached to them. Once you've finished that, we're going to go ahead and hit next. And actually, I'm going to save here at this point. I like to save usually every 2 tabs. And then we're going to go ahead and hit next. The income and benefits tab, this one covers individual employment as well as income and benefits. So the first question that it asks is whether the person is employed, yes or no. And it is a little bit different depending on how they answer it. If they answer yes, it asks for their status, whether they're full-time, part-time, seasonal, as well as the number of weeks. Now, if they are not employed, it also asks a different follow-up question, which is reason that they're not employed. It asks for types of income, and this is kind of brings up, there's about 14 different versions of income. These are directly from the HUD lists of income, where you can go through and actually select the type of income each one has. So if they have more than one, you can go ahead and select them. Excuse me. And if they do not have any income, you can actually leave it blank. So we're going to go ahead and say that this person has SSI, and there is a total household gross monthly income. So we're going to go ahead and put in the amount of monthly income from that source. It does pretty much the same thing for non-cash benefits. It asks if you are eligible to apply for them or not. And then it has a list of all the non-cash benefits. And you can go ahead and select which benefits they have, or if they don't have any, of course, you can leave that blank. And the score will total down at the bottom as with all the other tabs. We're going to go ahead and move on. And this tab is the household tab. This is kind of the tab that differentiates or kind of gives a type, you know, whether they are a family or they are an individual. And selecting these basically provides families actually get 20 points. If they are an individual, you can go ahead and select that, and that's pretty much all that you need to answer. You can answer in the number of people in the household and how many bedrooms they require, although it's pretty much defaulted to 1. However, if you do answer as family, it does open up, and it asks for a fair amount more information. Now, the first thing when you answer as family is it brings up a household grid, and it's asked you to enter in all the other household members. Now, the person you're working on, the person that you intake, should be the first person in the list. So what you can go ahead there is add each individual person. And as you can see, it kind of has, it's the same similar row structure as the homeless episode grid. And you can add as many household members as needed, because basically 1 row equals 1 household member. And you can go ahead and enter them in. directly into the grid. It's kind of a short form way of entering a client. Now, when you're on the last name, just kind of like during the original search, as soon as you enter it, it will search the system to see if they're in the system. If they are, you can select them, and what they'll be is they'll be added to this household. If not, you can go ahead and hit cancel, and they'll be added as a new client, which probably will be the case in most of these situations. And then it asks for the basic data, kind of what we call, universal data elements, gender, date of birth, race, ethnicity, veteran status, and it also allows you to go through and collect that information for the head of household or the person you're working on. So that's a good thing to check up on. There's the relationship to the head of household. It's basically who they are in relation to them. We've got ethnicity, veteran status, and there is race, and it's kind of a different little function here because it's not a drop down, because with race you can select someone can be multiracial, so they can have one or more race attached to them. So it's got this little icon here where you click on it, and it actually allows you to bring up a box here where you can pick and choose the different races that person may be associated with. Once you're done, you hit the plus box, this green little check box here to accept the changes, and then it'll show up in this list kind of what the choices are. So it kind of gives a visual choice of whether it's been selected or not, or whether it's been completed or not. So I'm just going to add one household member, but you do want to go through and add all other household members, whether adults and children, so that they can be properly added to the household as well as eventually placed on the prioritization list. Then you can update the number of people in the household as well as the number of bedrooms required. Now, if you do add a child, we're going to go ahead and add a child here. Too young. All right, let's do that. All right, 15. So when a child is added to the grid, the system should have opened up and shown a bunch of additional questions that show different household makeups. It basically asks, whether the household has one parent and two children, or if any of the children happen to be pregnant, as well as if the child, there's three parents within a household. So when there is a family of adults and children, there will be another section that opens up. I'm actually in the training site here. It is working in production. That will allow you to get some extra points within the assessment itself for the overall prioritization record. So what I'm going to do is actually put this on individual, and we're going to go ahead and hit next. I apologize for that not working as it should. Criminal history is the next one that comes up. And that asks us whether they have a criminal history, yes or no. If you select yes, it does open it up and ask for additional information based on it. If they select no, no additional questions are asked. And basically you have the, have you had in the last 3 months, it asks you if they've had any of the following happened. And for each one that you get checked, you get 5 additional points. So those add into the criminal history scoring within the entire screening. So once you're done with that, you go ahead and hit next, and the final page is an overall summary that provides a kind of an overall glimpse of any major category that your client or household falls into, as well as the individual scoring for each of the sections, plus an overall total. So going back up to the top, the 4 basic sections are whether they're chronically homeless, whether a veteran, whether they're a family, or whether they are a youth under age of 25. If any of those are true, you'll see an X here as being identified. They'll also show up within the points themselves. It also shows the total number of continuous days homeless, as well as, like I said before, all the scoring from each section broken down and their overall score. So once you're done here, you hit the finish button here. The finish basically is the final save. All right, let's see if that works. And the final save will basically say, hey, I'm done with all of the sections. And what the system will do is it will refresh the entire assessment. And it will be, instead of the tab section, you're going to be like it'll be a one long streaming page. And you can still will allow you to go back and make corrections as needed within each section. But what it does is it brings up place on prioritization list. And that basically allows you to, once you're done with the scoring, move to the last step within the intake and assessment. And this is where you're actually going to place the client, and if they had any household members, directly onto the prioritization list. Now, the person should be brought through automatically. Now, if you did add any household members, what it would actually do is add them here. So you do want to make sure that you check any household members that you do add, and the system will actually prompt you or give you a reminder if you forget to add them during the placement. The referral service needs. These are basically the 6 service needs that they could possibly have. So what you want to do is, by default, all 6 of them are chosen, but you want to try and pare them down the best as you possibly can for services they may not need. So like in the example, if they are not chronically, do not have a disability, you do not want to put permanent supportive housing. But like I said, it does default to all of them, and they can always be changed after the fact, so you do want to check on those. Add to household, add the wait list date, that always defaults to today. And the homeless category. This is a setting that will basically allow you to determine what their current housing status is. And this is something that you set during placement. It can also be changed during their stay on the list, and we'll cover that next month during the management class. But the 2 options that we have are Category 1 and not Category 1. So for selecting Category 1, that basically means they are currently literally homeless. And then, of course, not Category 1 means they are not literally homeless. So it helps, this is also placed on the list itself, and it can help people quickly identify clients that are literally homeless or just at risk of homelessness. Available counties, it allows you to select one or more counties in which the client is looking to be housed within. So you can go ahead and select one or more counties from the list. We're going to go ahead and pick Lawrence and Jefferson. We do have a Western COC County map that if you do click open, it will pop up and give you a basic map of the Western COC. So at least you can give a decent placement of, where the counties are in relation to each other in case the client may be there at the time to give them a visual look at it to help them pick the counties. There is assigned assessment staff. Every client that's placed on the list is assigned to a specific caseworker or assessment staff that did the assessment. By default, that it automatically defaults to whoever's doing the intake. That is myself. It also pulls in their phone number and email. This can be changed, though. If you click on the magnifying glass, you cancel out the case manager since it always defaults to who you are. It actually gives you a list of pretty much everybody, all the users in the system. So you can select any of the users. Say, if you're doing it for someone else, someone else is, one of your other caseworkers is going to take assignment of it, you can assign it to them. The system also allows you to manually just type in a name. So it doesn't have to be someone from the system. While it'll search for someone from the system, you can always cancel that out and do it do it manually. So it kind of allows the best of both worlds there. It does require the phone number and an email address, and it also now provides a general provider email. What that actually is an overall email that can be used for general communication purposes. So if you have one for your provider, maybe we'll put like dcd@pa.gov. And that way it's like a nice contact where, if the assessment staff happens to not be in or unable to be reached, there's another place that people can contact if they need information or need to get in touch with either the caseworker or the client themselves. Client contact information, you can enter in the phone and email information for the client there as well. Those are optional while the assessment staff is required. There's comments. These are placement comments that you can go ahead and enter in. And the last step is selecting the provider itself. Now this is where I know most providers only exist in a single county. So a lot of them will be automatically selected, but there are actually a fair amount of counties that do operate in multiple counties. So what we've done is we've actually created multiple county providers itself, so that helps us for reporting as well as understanding placements and actions that occur in different counties. So if you do have multiple counties, you want to make sure that you select the proper county within that list so it gets properly associated during the placement. Now just a note, if you are in a provider and you seem to be missing a county, please let Javon know and she can let me know so we can get that rectified within the system. Once those are all set, you can go ahead and hit add to prioritization list, and that pretty much finishes the process. The client will get placed on the list itself. Now what it does do is it refreshes to the basic assessment screening screen where it lists and it kind of provides all the summary. And we kind of do that because here when you select this little blue ball, you actually have the ability at this time to enter in any coordinated intake notes that you may want to enter, as well as you can upload any documentation as well if you have any at that time. Now, with the coordinated intake notes, and we'll cover this probably a little bit more in depth on the next training in the prioritization list management training, but the coordinated intake notes are kind of a special note that allows these notes to be placed by any providers that are within the continuum that are participating in coordinated entry through Western COC to enter and review these notes. They're kind of community-based notes, and they can be entered by anyone at any time. You can enter them at intake, and you can enter them while they're on the list as well, and it kind of provides a way of communicating and providing updates for everybody, so people can look at these notes to see what a client's status is, as well as other important information about contacting them within this area. So anytime you're doing anything or working with a client, it's always good to add in a note. And to do that, there should be, once you go into there, each of the notes will be listed, and you can actually go in and view the note individually, and it'll show information, the note itself, its type, as well as the actual text in the note. So that's good information to have. You can also add a new intake note. And it's got some contact types that you can select. This is first time, so initial contact, placement. So you can go ahead and enter in at this time any specific notes about this client's placement that isn't already kind of entered with the settings and the assessment that we've put in. And as you can see, it'll be entered on the notes itself and can be viewed by all the providers that are scrubbing and looking over the prioritization list itself. Documents and upload, same principle. It can be uploaded, used, and shared with any member agency or provider within the system. It'll show any documents that are here. You can also add new documents, gives you the basic category, and you can enter in descriptions, and it actually allows you to upload a document. So you can go ahead and upload a PDF, a Word document. Even if it's a collection of documents, you can zip them up into a single zip file and then upload that. So that's a good process that can be used for document sharing and uploading. Now, I think we have covered basically the whole assessment. Now, what I was going to do before we jump to the policy side was I was going to do quickly, I'd like to do it from a domestic violence assessment center to kind of quickly show the small differences in process on that, especially during the client entry. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. One thing that does need to be done is the work group controls, whether you do a domestic, whether you're a DVAC or a general AC. And when I showed when you first logged in that you can select your work group, there's also, once you're logged in, there's actually an option within the system that allows you to switch between work groups on the fly. So this can be helpful for this situation and other situations. Possibly, when you're coordinated entry and you also have your own HMIS projects, if you want to switch between those work groups. Up at the top right, should be next to help in the sign out, should be your name. It's actually a hyperlink. It's actually an option that if you click on, it'll actually open up this screen, and it kind of gives you the same options that you have when you log in. You have your work groups to where you can actually switch immediately between your work groups. So you can jump to HMIS programs, or in this case, I'm going to jump over to the DV one. You can also change organizations if you happen to have multiple organizations as well. So we're going to jump to the DV one, and once you're done, you just hit the apply button, and you'll see kind of the system blink a little bit, and it basically refreshes the screen, and now you're going to be in the new work group. So now coming from a DVAC process or center, we're going to go ahead and start off with this process. In the beginning, starts exactly the same. They do have a coordinated entry intake option up here, and this basically starts the whole process when there's a new intake. Now, one of the main differences between the DVACs and the regular assessment centers is the domestic violence centers and their process doesn't allow for the collection or even the viewing of any personally identifying piece of information. So that means names, Social Security numbers, date of birth, that sort of information is not entered and it's not used. So from a searching and viewing standpoint, everything is done through IDs. And that's how we track all of the DVAC clients, or what we call DV or anonymous clients within the system. So when you start the intake, the system, instead of giving the regular search, basically provides 3 fields in which you can enter and use a search. We have the HMIS ID. Now that is the internal ID that the InTrack system automatically gives each client. So it's not able to be changed, and every single DVAC client gets a unique one. Now, there's also a DVAC ID. Now, that one is flexible, and that is actually controlled by the assessment center and or the client. That is one that can be assigned to a DV or anonymous client to also allow for additional searching and tracking within the system. So what we're going to go ahead and do is the first thing that should be done is, if a DV client has either an HMIS ID or a DVAC ID, what you can do is you can go ahead and we're going to go ahead and search. And the search works much the same. As soon as you tab off the DVAC field, it'll actually go into a search for it. And you can go ahead and look to see if that client exists. If they don't exist, especially if they don't have an HMIS ID or DV ID, there's not much searching for, and you're going to have to create a new client. If they do have one of those, then you should be able to search for them and find them in the system. Now, if a client is returned, what you will see is you will see them down here within the specific area. Now, each of these results or rows is a different client. Now, as you can see here, it is built special, so it only returns DV or anonymous results, but it does show the DVAC ID and the HMIS ID. So if you can line up that information with a previous client, what you want to do is you want to select that client. And what that can do is actually that'll pull that through and say, hey, they're already in the system, I want to use this client, and then that client can be used going forward in the process. That also kind of goes back to the general AC. When you're searching for existing clients, the same process works that way as well. Now, I do understand with DVACs, if they don't have a DV ID, odds are it's going to be very difficult to find them in the system, and they probably don't exist. So if they don't have either, or you've searched and they do not have one, the system will automatically create a new client when you move on to the next step. So that's the main difference between the GACs and the DVACs, is the names versus the ID methodology. So we're going to go ahead and hit Save and Continue. And the same process is going to come up. They're going to get the actual pre-screening itself, and they are going to be asked the same literal homeless as well as at-risk for homeless questions itself. Now, there is a little bit difference with the DVACs. With the general assessment centers, they had to be either homeless or at risk of homeless. With DVACs, as long as they're yes to the unsafe or afraid, means they're fleeing or potentially fleeing, they do not need to be at risk or at homeless to enter into the system. But there are situations in which they're fleeing, not completely homeless, that we still want to have them enter in. So that rule does not apply to the DVACs. But they do ask if they are homeless or at risk, if they are being discriminated against. If they are, they select yes. It does have the check boxes, but because their information is confidential, instead of sending out an email automatically with their information, it does provide kind of a message so that the caseworker, intake worker can manually direct them to their website, and it allows them to manually complete a fair housing advice request that's more secure than an open email. Okay, once you've answered the pre-screen, same process, as before. You're going to go ahead and hit next, and the same assessment screening tool is going to be brought up. All of the main questions are the same. All the scoring questions, all the scoring rules are exactly the same as you saw before, as with a general assessment. The main difference is, again, any personal identifying information, anywhere you might enter a name, date of birth, Social Security, that has all been hidden and is going to be skipped in this version of the assessment. It also kind of notes whether it's a DV version. It shows the HMIS ID, and it also shows the DVAC ID in place of the name in all of these new instances, whether it's the assessment, the prioritization list. It allows you, if you hadn't entered in a DVAC at the time of entry, you can go ahead and enter it in and change it here. So it does allow it to be entered and changed as needed. And then same process, you can go through, fill out pretty much the entire process. All the scoring is pretty much the same. The one difference with the DV is their domestic violence survivor situation is defaulted to yes, and then it does ask when the situation occurred and if they are currently fleeing as of right now. Because when they're sent to a DVAC, it's fleeing or potentially fleeing. So this question basically solidifies whether they're fleeing or not, and the points are based upon whether they're fleeing and whether the situation happened in the last 3 months. So those do provide scoring opportunities only for DVACs for those clients. Veteran status is the same. Income and benefits is the same. The household is a little bit different. They do have individual and family, but with family, it doesn't ask any of the follow-up questions. It doesn't ask for the family grid, since with that grid itself, it's about collecting personally identifying information. So if you do enter in family, you want to make sure that you enter in the number of people in the household, because usually we get that on the prioritization list from the actual grid. But for DV assessments, we actually take it from this number instead. Now, with the youth scoring, 70 points are allotted to assessments for those identified as youth. That's basically if the head of household is 24 years old or younger. Now, with the regular assessment, we use their date of birth. So we have the information already entered. We can calculate youth automatically on the fly. However, with the DVAC, we do not collect any of that information, so we can't calculate that automatically. So we have added the youth head of household checkbox within this screen. So this allows, when you're working with a DV client, if they are 24 years or younger, you want to select this box, and that will give them the official youth designation and allow them to pick up the points on the screening itself. So I wanted to point that out because that is a difference between the two assessments. The criminal background is exactly the same as shown before. And as we can see with the the summary sheet, we check the box so they are identified, and it provides the scoring itself. We're going to go ahead and hit finish. And it does refresh, and then provide you the place on the prioritization list button. So we're going to go ahead and hit that. And the last difference is pretty much everything that you saw from the placement is the same. I just wanted to kind of show the minor difference in the names not shown, as well as household members. They aren't shown since they aren't entered, but you will have the client identifier as well as the DVAC there for identification. And of course, those are the main ones that are used within the prioritization list going forward. All the other questions are the same: homeless category, available counties, and we're going to go ahead and just put them on the list real quick. Same thing with the multiple counties. And once you're done filling it out, you hit add to prioritization list, and they are added as well. As you can see here all throughout the system, they should be labeled as anonymous client. Same thing within the notes themselves. They are anonymous client. However, you can still enter in the notes for them under the anonymous client identifier. I do know you just want to be careful with DV clients not to put any personal identifying information within the notes itself for these clients. But everything else should work pretty much exactly the same. And now just to quickly show, even though we're going to cover this in more depth next month, the prioritization list itself, once you've placed them on the list, we're going to go ahead and click on that Providers tab. And if we open up the menu under prioritization list, it is actually right here. If you click on that prioritization list, that is actually where they will all show up. And as we can see, there's the two clients I just added, the DV client, which is identified as DV, along with the DVAC ID, and then there's Bill, who I added from the GAC, all there and ready to be viewed. I believe that is it. So what we can do is I will check the chat box, and we can go ahead and jump back to the policy parts and kind of tips of smooth operation. Okay. Tips for smooth operation. How to inform clients of the CES process. There's 20 counties participate with the coordinated.
Hello?
Hello, I'm sorry, did I go away?
Okay, I think I'm here. Yeah, I couldn't hear anyone either. Okay, so yeah, so tips for smooth operation. So Brian just reviewed with everyone the process for data entering the information into the system. And so we just thought that it would be a wise idea to give you some tips for smooth entry, smooth operation. So the first tip is how to inform clients of this coordinated entry system process. So, you know, when you're giving your speech or your script per se, you can let them know, you know, that 20 counties participate with the coordinated entry process. And these 20 counties all have housing programs with openings, and they may call the client when they have openings in their program that the client may be eligible for. I would also let the client know that they only have to, at a minimum, complete the assessment one time with a designated assessment center to be able to access the continuum of care and emergency solutions housing or rapid rehousing services. So just remember, at no time should the consumer be notified of their placement on the housing prioritization list. And the reason being is because the housing prioritization list changes quickly, very rapidly. So, you know, their placement on that list, again, changes very frequently. And if they want to know, you know, why are they required to do the assessment, you know, we just, you know, I would inform them that this is just to ensure that everyone is entering onto that prioritization in a uniformed way and accessing services also in a uniformed way. And we're just really trying to eliminate barriers to housing. So that client should be as truthful as possible, whenever possible, and provide you as much information as possible so we can connect them to the most appropriate service providers. So attachment I was provided with the policies and procedure manual back in January, and you can find attachment I on the PennsylvaniaCOC.org webpage. And basically that is a script that would help you to also communicate the coordinated entry process with the consumer. Okay. So also that homeless assessment grid, so as Brian mentioned earlier, you know, we want to make sure that we provide the full name of the homeless service agency in the homeless grid. This is going to just help all providers, all users of the system to have a better, to connect with those organizations that the client has worked with or has worked with in the past or is currently working with. You know, when we are selecting the homeless location, you know, we just want to try to select the best option that describes that client's homeless situations. And then, you know, as we're hearing or learning the different homeless service providers that that client has worked with in the past, it would be a good idea for us to start obtaining releases such as the release of information Also to start to collect some of that eligibility documentation. So if the client mentions that they have a disability, it would be good to start to obtain the verification process. But just to clarify, you know, documentation, if that client does not have documentation at the time that the assessment is being completed, you know, they'll still continue on with the assessment. We wouldn't stop the assessment just because we do not have any specific type of documentation. So once we have obtained that information, we can go in and upload the eligibility information or the ROIs to the client's prioritization record. And then also another tip is just to make sure that we're frequently updating the continuous days homeless field, which Brian had touched on earlier in his presentation, because those days do change as our clients' episodes change frequently. So you also want to ensure that the client has the correct homeless classification. So if they're chronically homeless, we want to ensure that we have them marked as such. So as for the domestic violence assessment, only the households that are truly fleeing domestic violence are to receive the additional 30 points. The DVACs, you know, they are completing assessments on any persons with domestic violence safety issues. So if that client, even if the situation or the issue was established years ago, if that client feels and chooses to have their identifying information to remain safe, we should be connecting them to the local domestic violence assessment center. And it is permitted for the domestic violence assessment centers to conduct assessments over the phone, you know, once they have ensured and confirmed that the client is indeed in a safe location to complete the assessment. So when we're creating that client prioritization record, which is the last step in that client intake process, you know, we want to be sure to include the family in the household. And Brian showed us how we could click them in. One, because when we're looking at the prioritization list record, we want to ensure that the family matches how many household members are actually included in that household, and then for other reporting type of purposes. So we only want to refer clients to the appropriate referral options. So if that client does not have a disability, for instance, we should refrain from referring them to the permanent supportive housing option, which is contained in that client prioritization record. Also, when we update the available fields, you know, we'll go in and we'll update every time that we learn that the client has changed their county preferences. So there is no limit on how many times the client can change their preferences, and anyone who learns that the preferences may have changed, you know, can update that field. It doesn't have to just be the assessment center, but if a provider learns of that information, they can also go in and update. And it's a good idea if we utilize that Western COC map to just provide the client with a visual of where each county is located. And then we want to remember to assign the most appropriate staff that we want our providers to follow up with, who would help make the connection to the client. That's important to list in the prioritization record before placement onto the list. So when we're making these referrals and we're connecting our clients to other providers, we want to ensure that all the referrals have been received by the receiving agency. So for instance, if we are connecting the client to a domestic violence assessment center, we'll want to call and make sure that client reached the facility and that they were able to be assessed and properly placed on the list. There is policies around when a consumer is added to the prioritization list, so we just want to ensure that we're meeting the policies, the specified policy, which we'll go over here in a moment. If a client transitions to the Domestic Violence Assessment Center, their prioritization record, which was entered by the General Assessment Center or the auxiliary agency, must be deleted, and the client should then be completely re-entered as an anonymous client by the Domestic Violence Assessment Center. So we just want to also remember that there is no limit on how many times a client can reject a program offer as well. So they can reject as much as they want, and they will still not lose their place on the prioritization list. Okay. So in our policies and procedures manuals, we have a under operating standards for assessment centers, we have a few policies in there, and we're going to touch on them real briefly. So I know that you all are familiar with this. Are you literally homeless? Are you at risk of becoming homeless? And is anyone in your home making you feel unsafe or afraid? These are our 3 points of entry to the coordinated assessment. And any positive answer to those referral pre-screening questionnaires will indicate that that person is appropriate to have the coordinated assessment conducted. So we do want to permit entry to that assessment. And if these questions need further defined for you all, you can review the attachment A, which can also be found with the policies and procedure manuals and is contained on the PennsylvaniaCOC.org webpage. So earlier I was mentioning we had some time frames as far as when someone should be referred to or is required to be referred and placed on the prioritization list. So consumers requesting housing services will be assessed and appropriately added on that housing prioritization list within the following time frame. So it is preferred that we have our clients added to the prioritization list within the first 24 hours of the requested assessment for all literally homeless individuals and families. But it is required by the close of the next business day of the requested assessment for literally homeless individuals and within 3 business days of the request for at risk of homeless individuals. So a client comes to us and we then refer them for shelter. That within the first 24 hours, we would like to see them placed on the prioritization list. And if it can't be done within the first 24 hours, we're requesting, it's required that it be done by the close of the next business day. So there are 2 types of assessments that can be conducted. One is the online assessment entry, and then there is a paper version that's available as well. If you use the paper version, the policy is that the paper version would then be added to the online, that the paper version would be uploaded to the online assessment version by the close of the next business day. But we understand that some of our assessment staff are mobile and they may not have access to a laptop, so having these paper versions are very handy for them. So they are available, and again, they are on the contained on the PennsylvaniaCOC.org webpage. We have a DVAC paper version and the homeless system paper version available. So again, assessments are permitted to be conducted over the phone by an approved assessment center. If the consumer is unable to reach the appropriate assessment center due to disability or lack of transportation, or there may be some other circumstances that would prevent them from coming in to an assessment center to complete the coordinated entry assessment. You know, as assessment centers, we must ensure that participants not be denied access to the coordinated entry system on the basis that the participant is or has been a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. So if the participant identifies as being a victim, not sure where the rest of that sentence went, then we would then refer them to the Domestic Violence Assessment Center. And then physical assessment areas must be made safe and confidential. So again, that's when we would defer to our domestic violence assessment centers in instances where a consumer preferred for their identification information to remain safe and private. Okay, so each county, we have asked for each county to have a plan for referrals to emergency shelters and assessment centers on a 24-hour, 7-day basis. So if no shelter is available in the local community, then the individual/family would then be referred by the access point or assessment center to the closest emergency shelter option. And you can find a list of assessments and the referral lines for each of the different counties. They are listed within Attachment B, and again, that's also on the COC.org webpage, PennsylvaniaCOC.org webpage. So there are a few required trainings for staff who are assigned to complete the coordinated entry process. This being one of those mandatory trainings. So it would be the Western Coordinated Entry and Client Track training. There is a prioritization list management training, the coordinated entry policies and procedures, privacy and security, safety, and a few other trainings that can all be found on the recorded trainings can be found on the PennsylvaniaCOC.org webpage. So if you have not yet participated in any of these listed trainings, please do so. Okay, just a little bit about the client sharing options that are within the coordinated entry assessment, or the intake portion of the coordinated entry assessment. Just a quick note that general assessment centers, we are permitted to verbally accept the consumer's consent to sharing of information via the system. However, the domestic violence assessment centers, they are collecting written consent from the victim before they are permitted to share information with the PA-HMIS coordinated entry system participating agencies. So for a list of those participating agencies, again, I would refer to attachment B. So even if a consumer refuses to the consent sharing option, they should still proceed with the assessment to access the prioritization list, and then parts of the consumer's record or assessment form may be restricted for safety reasons. But let's just say if you all wanted to refer to a participating agency who's not listed on that attachment B, it's very important to obtain the release of information in order to refer out to clients who are not a participating agency of the system. And then the last slide is just that we are, as assessment centers, required by law to follow the Fair Housing Act, Section 4 of the Rehabilitation Act, and Title 5 of the Civil Rights Act. We have to ensure that, we're meeting those fair housing regulations and that consumers are not steered towards a particular housing facility or neighborhood because of their race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, or family status. So we have built in the fair housing questions into the assessment center, so that is going to help to guide that process. And Jamie Milligan, who works with the Fair Housing Law Center, is our direct point of contact. So when our client mentions to us that they have faced a discriminatory eviction, etc., we should encourage them to speak with Jamie Milligan over there at the Fair Housing Law Center. And Jamie Milligan is available to provide us with trainings to better be able to have conversations with our consumers. And if you all would like, I can make that connection. I can help your agency reach out to her and schedule a training. So let me know if that's something that you would be interested in. I know she is very much interested in speaking with all assessment centers. Okay, so I am finished. Are there any questions at this point in time?
Yeah, I'm looking in the chat, and I do not see any questions at all at this point.
Okay. We'll give it a couple minutes just to give them some time to type in.
Yeah, just as a reminder, there's a chat box. You can go ahead and type it in and shoot off the question. We can read it off.